Good evening. My name is Joan Lynn, and I am the Director of Curriculum for the Millis Public Schools. Thank you for joining us tonight. Tonight, we are here to meet the three finalists for the Director of Student Support Services position for the Millis Public Schools. Tonight, each candidate will share some information about themselves, and then I will ask them some of the questions that were submitted by you, the families and parents of our community, and we will allow them the time to answer those questions. Each candidate will have 30 minutes, the first one starting at 6, then 6:30, followed by 7 o'clock. Just a reminder, the listserv letter that we sent home inviting you to tonight had 3 links at the bottom of the page, and that was for you to give feedback on the candidates so that we have that to be added to the feedback that we got from our teachers and the other people who have met with these candidates this week. So we look forward to tonight. And again, thank you for joining us. Right now, I'm going to admit the first finalist. Good evening, Martha. You just need to unmute.
Very good. Good evening. How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
Good, thank you.
So thank you very much for joining us tonight. Martha, we have we have people watching us on the YouTube channel, and our goal tonight is for you to share some information about yourself. And then we've had some folks that have been kind enough to submit some questions for me to ask you, and we're going to use their questions tonight as we go through the next 30 minutes or so.
Great.
So with that, Martha, please introduce yourself to our Millis families.
Wonderful. Hi, everyone on YouTube. I wish we could be in person, but yeah, this is how we could do business these days. So I wanted to introduce myself. I'm Martha Bakken. I'm currently the Assistant Superintendent for Student Services in the Stoneham Public Schools, a little north of Boston. We have about 1,000 students, more than Millis. We have 3 elementary schools and a middle and high school, so relatively similar. And I've been there for 7 years. And previous to that, I was the Director of Student Services, so a similar role to the role here in Millis. Before that, I was actually in Lexington, and before that, actually in Westwood, so not too far down the road from Millis for a number of years. And I am sort of, in terms of my educational background, I have a background in policy, so public policy, background in a sort of eclectic and bilingual education. So I was a bilingual special educator and regular educator, general educator for a while. And I speak Spanish and Chinese, which is a interesting combination. And I also have a background in special education, obviously, and a degree in special education. So that's sort of my educational background, a little bit about my professional background. Personally, I'm a mother to a wonderful 8th grader who's going to high school next year. So I'm if any of you are in the midst of that, that is also my my role right now. And so I can completely appreciate the anxiety that comes with any of these transitions that we're doing at the moment. So I think in terms of just a little bit about what is passionate and what I'm passionate about. I would say that for me, the really critical piece for special education always, but right at the moment in particular, is this idea of being nimble, of making sure that we're able to meet students and families and staff's needs very quickly, because things are changing. We said this was sort of my theme long before COVID, but when COVID hit, it was sort of amplified, if that's the right word, in that we need to be able to shift very quickly to meet student need. A student might change, or what we might be doing might not quite work for a student, but with a little tweak, it works well. So one of the reasons that I'm really excited about the position in Millis is this ability, and I have this ability in my current position as well, to sort of do things innovatively and creatively, not wait an incredibly long time for it to happen, or not know the staff or the students or the families well enough to make that innovative sort of creative choice. And so I think that what I like about a town the size of Millis and the community like Millis, very supportive of their education, very supportive of teachers and staff, is that we really are able to do things that allow us, the staff and the school and the community, to be nimble, to really meet those students and parents and others where they're at, and be able to make those sometimes subtle and sometimes large changes that really meet the need of a student with special needs. So that's my passion. I have lots of other thoughts about it, but I would say that's sort of in a short period. So that's kind of where my philosophy that I bring to this position.
Thank you. Absolutely. Thank you so much. We've had a couple of people ask the question about what do you see as the role of parents and guardians in the IEP process?
Yeah, I think that this is critical. If there was a word more important than critical, I think I would use it. I think for me, the role of parents in the IEP process, I've always been an advocate, or someone who talks about the fact that we have IEP meetings for students, right? And I'll start just with the IEP meetings at first, but expand beyond that. Is that the role in your particular child's life is critical. You're with your child more than any individual, in the schools. And what is really important is that we have the feedback of the people who are involved in that child's life. Certainly the teachers, certainly the service providers that provide service to the child, but the parent as well. And so I think a lot of times when you have a meeting, like an IEP meeting, people sort of think it goes well if you kind of, everyone does what they need to do, right? We have this kind of meeting and we tell you, people tell you what's happening, and then they tell you what they're recommending, and then the meeting, everyone agrees and it's over. I'm sort of the mind that we need to have sort of much fuller, more comprehensive conversations, not that they have to last longer or be over and over and repetitive, but really that they need to be full and rich, where people feel very open and feel comfortable having that, I'm not sure that's working, when he comes home, that doesn't work for him. When I do this happens. Oh, I noticed that too. One of the things that happened in our district, at least during COVID, was my staff and my parents started to say, wow, we don't need to have those conversations as much in depth in the IEP meetings, because we're having them every day at home, right? During our COVID conversations, they say, oh yeah, I saw that you did that with him during your occupational therapy session. I noticed that too. Oh yeah, the reason I did that was this. Oh, that's interesting. It didn't work when you did that. Oh, good to know. Like, let's do something different. So I think the role is this sort of synergistic, active collaboration rather than, I would say, passive collaboration. So I think that's a critical role. I think also one of the roles that I find really helpful is this, I know I can't see any of you, but is this idea of collaboration with a group as well. When I first arrived in my previous district, there wasn't really an active CPAC. And to be honest with you, I was like actively wanted that feedback. I'm kind of that person who enjoys and really actively seeks out. So what do you think of that? I did this year. Was that helpful? Was that useful? Did it meet your needs? And so I think besides having sort of individual impact and conversations and with your individual team and about your individual child, I think we also need to have sort of this bigger conversation, which is CPAC is a really great vehicle for that, is having feedback, sort of like, what kind of program are we thinking about, right? Are we thinking about programming, as I was saying before, we've got a group that's of students that have been going, through our schools, and we've been having conversations all along, like what happens to them when they're 3? Well, now guess what? They're 17, right? That really different conversations we're having, still really good conversations, but very different ones that we're having with our 17 group of students who are about to be in that postgraduate program than our parents of students who are 3. But both of those conversations are really important, and it's both the group and the individual piece. So I think both of those are really important when you're talking about parents and people involved in the community.
Great. Thank you, Martha. Martha, how would you go about addressing not all graduates, special needs graduates included, don't go on to college, but are often in need of job skills? How would you address that?
Yeah, that's a critical component. It's actually interesting because I heard that you also are starting an 18 to 22-year-old program and have started, I think they had said, and we are looking at that really specifically. We started with our students with more significant needs, but we've really broadened it to all students, to be honest with you, special education students. And now we're getting sort of that, like, hey, wait a minute, what about other students who need this, right? Like, it's not just special education students. But what I did in my district is we had, sort of the more traditional model of hiring out some people people to do some job coaching. And when I first got there, some good stuff that was going on, but sort of much more limited. And I actually kind of had a position. The company that provided our transition services kind of decided not to provide anything anymore, kind of went under. And I kind of moved some grant money and some other money, and we hired a transition specialist, which again, for a district our size, super, super unusual to have sort of a full-time person dedicated to that. But what we really talked about was sort of this idea that all this, required by law, as we should be, to provide this continuum of services, right? To prepare children, as our mission statement says in special education in my current district, to be successful grown-ups, right? That's what we start out at three. I know for parents of 3-year-olds, it's a little hard to fathom, but we start at 3 and we end at either graduation or 22 with this idea that we want you to be a successful grown-up. And for some students, being a successful grown-up means going to college, right? It means going to college, being able to do your own laundry and do your own finances and, get your meals and do all the things besides the academics that college entails. We've done some stuff with, pre-college programs and preparing kids, because that's, for some students, that's a big leap, right? For even typical students, that can be a big leap. But for some of our students who really struggle with the social piece of it, or they struggle with the organizational or the executive functioning piece, that can be challenging. So preparing them for that. We've had some places where we've had kids stay overnight at places. So, the couple of programs we had where they stay one night overnight. It's really hard for parents, easier for kids. But we did some of that. But what we really been working on with our transition coordinator is this idea of expanding our student skills, all of our student skills. So certainly working on we have placed kids in jobs. Unfortunately, with COVID, that's been a little bit curtailed. We ended up actually, again, moving some money around and buying a little tiny bus. We don't have any of our own transportation. I noticed you have that, but don't have much of that. But we had managed to get a bus and use it partially for sports, kind of make it a dual use bus. So now we have an easy, quick way to get kids out into the community, out to their jobs, out to, even if just to go grocery shopping and, do a budget and figure that out. And not just for students with significant needs, but sort of all students at whatever level they need to figure that out. So I think for me, again, it's a critical component of successful grown-up. Successful grown-ups don't attend college for the rest of their lives, right? Even the students who go to college, right? They're not just doing academic work for the rest of their lives. So it's really important that we combine those life skills and those vocational skills.
Can you talk a little bit about supports or systems that could help with trauma and mental health?
Yes, absolutely. This is I think to be honest with you, that's what I talk about most of the days these days. It's really critically important. We were just having a meeting about this. Actually, we were having two conversations, one about mental health of staff, because at the moment that's a really important topic too, and then mental health and trauma with students. One of the things that we did, and I did in line with my counterpart, who's the curriculum director, assistant superintendent, is that we really looked at what our staff needed, the whole staff, first of all, not just the special education staff, right? And we used the Leslie trauma courses. I don't know if people are familiar with them, but they're trauma-informed instruction, they're fabulous. Joe Rastusha is a old friend of mine who runs part of it, but it is they have a 4-course training program where people get certified in trauma informed instruction, and they do it really inexpensive. I mean, compared to what you would do in a normal college or graduate course, but they really work with teachers specifically, and the people who teach the courses are like principals and teachers, people who really understand trauma. And it's really been helpful to think about having everyone know about trauma-informed instruction, whether they all went through the 4-course process, that's not necessarily, but that they've all been sort of have that sort of lens on looking at students. Because, as we know, that some of those traumatic, like ACE, they call them sort of trauma indicators. People have, they may be, have a divorce in their family, someone has died, they may be in long-term trauma. Every student, we need to be aware of what's happening with that and be able to treat as if we have all students have some sort of trauma, because we need to have trauma informed instruction. So I think that sort of lays the baseline for the way I think about that. And then what I would say is then what we've tried to work in, and I've worked with a lot of really different clinical people, is supports that go through the whole range of that, right? So there are students where that support and that information that our general education and special education staff have, that's enough, right? We've met their needs, we're able to do it. But then there's students who need more in different things. And so one of the things we've worked on is making sure we have a consistent response for those students who need that more, right? Not that, if you went to this school or you went to this teacher, they did X and this person does Y, is really having a consistent response. That means, it doesn't mean every kid gets the same thing. What it means is everyone has the traditional response. So they're like, oh, okay, this is this interesting thing, oh, okay, I think this child needs to be desensitized this, or, oh, actually, I think we're looking at this particular issue this way. So we did a lot of training among our clinical staff. I brought in some consultants. We also did a lot of job alikes and talking about that piece of it. And then we also went up to having that support for kids who truly have some significant trauma or mental illness, and making sure that we have high quality supports. And we know what those are, right? So there's a lot of good research, maybe 20 years ago, 25 years ago when I started, there wasn't as much good research about what really kids with high levels of trauma needed. It was kind of a little more shot in the dark. This works with this kid, this works with this kid. There's some really good research out there. McLean's and other places have some really great departments looking at students who are in trauma or students with mental health needs. So I'd say it needs to be that continuum of service for that population of students.
You talked a little bit about being nimble and sort of the advantage of a small district. Right now, we, have some housing going on, we're building of houses, and, lots of young families with young kids. Can you talk a little bit about how you would address, maybe the need for more preschool kids coming this year, or maybe next year there's some, students coming in and there's a bigger population at the middle school or at the high school. Can you talk a little bit about the flexibility of that?
Absolutely. That is key, right? With a small district, that's key. We used to, we used to joke that, 3 or 4 kids can really in a small district make a huge difference, right? In preschool, I just got a call, in fact, from my preschool person in my district right now, and she has 4, just in 1 week, she had 4 students from early intervention join us. And, they're not coming till next year, but we're still sort of like, oh my goodness, 4, that's a lot, right? And what I think we really, need to do is with a small district, it's even more nimble, right? Because in a bigger district, 4 students might not change the population, right? Or if you had a couple of students who have a similar profile in the high school, you might already have a program set up just for that typical type of student. But when you have a smaller district, and this is what we're always working on, is there the advantages of being nimble, of being small, right? You can really meet that need. But there's also, you might only have 2 children, or you might only have 4 children or 1 child. So I think what you need to do is, I always feel like in a small district, you're constantly reevaluating, right? You don't just do it every 10 months or 12 months, you're always thinking, God, try to think as far ahead as you can, right? So if there's housing development and that's coming, right? You're not shocked when 4 new families move in. You're like, oh, okay, I know that that's coming. So you're always planning. I laugh because I think someone was laughing at me because I was planning for these kids who were in 8th grade, these kids who were in 8th grade, and we were talking about their 12th grade year, and they were like, Martha, oh God, we can barely get through COVID. But we're thinking about these kids later on. And so I think when you're talking about, 3 kids who move into the middle school, or 3 kids who just happen to be, identified, who may have had a trauma and now are kids who have needs at the middle school. And you're like, oh gosh, I think what you really need to do is step back and think about what these students need, right? What are their needs? And how, do we have things that already meet those needs? And do we need to just be a little more creative? Oh, we had it for 8th graders, but we have never had a 6th grader who needed this. So how do we make what really already worked at 8th grade work down at 6th grade? Or, gosh, this is a different looking group of students than we've had before. What do we need to support them, right? What does the staff need? What does the administration need? What does the student need to make sure that student gets what they need and feels supported? So I think that piece about being nimble also means constantly evaluating, right? Not waiting till oh, really? 6 months later, oh, they came, is really looking back to exactly what, like I said, we have these 4 students who came from early intervention. They're not starting till September, but we're going to meet on them next week. So that we know what's happening and what we need to do to support them.
Sure. Can you talk a little bit about equity and equal and equitable?
Yes. My favorite, if I were in my office, I would show you my little cartoon, which is having all the, it's these, all these animals that are sitting in like a snake and an elephant. And they say, well, it's this equal test, right? The test is because you all have to get up to the top of the tree. Right. And there's this elephant and a snake, and everyone's sort of looking at the tree and, and figuring out how they're going to be able to get up to the top. Right. And I think for me, the piece about equity is that we're all have that opportunity, right? So it really means that we're looking at how we can support students so they have a challenge, but are also able to have an equal standing in this. And I think that's one of the things that, for many years in special education, we've had conversations over the years. When I first started many, many years ago, we had these conversations that went like, well, how come they have to have a word bank? That's not fair. Every kid doesn't get a word bank, right? That's not equitable. Every kid doesn't get a word bank. That's the way it is. And, we talked a lot about, a lot of pieces around, in general education, and I'm sure that across the state on this, the equal isn't equitable, right? Like, let's talk about this. Let's look at what this means. Let's think about what looks like in other people's shoes, right? And this isn't just for staff. This is for students too, right? That student who pipes up and says, like, how come he gets to, right? I can't do that, right? How come? Well, what does he need? You get this. He doesn't get that, or she gets to do this. How come she gets to walk around the room and I don't get to get up and walk around the room? Well, let's talk about what she needs. What do you need? What do you get? And those conversations are super important in this. And I feel like it's not always easy to have those conversations, because they're not always easy conversations. They're not always conversations where everyone's like, sure, that makes sense. I mean, I always bring up to my staff when I'm having these conversations, I don't know if it was probably now 15 years ago, a while ago, the SAT had a legal lawsuit because a group of parents wanted students to have more time on the SAT. And the SAT said no, right? At the beginning, because they did not want to, they said more time was part of their test. Part of what they were testing was whether you could do it quickly, right? Not what you knew.
Mhm.
And it was a fascinating law case, because it was sort of like, what are you actually testing? Are you testing what you can do? Or are you testing how quickly you can do it? Because to me, they're very different things. And that was a really interesting case for society, I think. And that's sort of, for me, that's a bit of a metaphor for like this, what is it that we want students to learn? And then how can we help them get there?
Great. Thank you, Martha. Martha, can you talk a little bit about your communication with families?
Absolutely. I think I told someone yesterday, when I was in Millis, that it was makes me funny because my secretary is always like, Martha doesn't do well locked in a room, on Zoom. And I feel like that's maybe how I've spent my last, not quite that bad, but I feel like maybe that's where I spent my time. I think for me, and I think it's true in most districts that I've been in, it's really about multiple modes of communication. And it's really about making sure that all aspects of communication are available. So, for some parents now, I've been in my current position or my current district for 7 years, they're very comfortable calling me up. Hey, Martha, can I, I have a parent who comes in and brings me a cup of tea and says, let's sit down, every once in a while. She has a kid out of district and she's like, let's just talk. And I'm like, okay, let's talk. Let's find out what's going on. But, there's that mode of communication. But for some parents, that's really, especially at the beginning, right? It's not comfortable. I was saying that when I first started in my other position, I went around and went to some IEP meetings, and I actually realized it made parents really nervous that I was there, right? Because I think the people before me had not done that, right? I'm like, oh, there's like something wrong, Martha. There's something wrong. Did I do, I'm like, no, I'm just here to find out, learn about children, learn about the district. So I think for me, creating that culture of like, I'm around, I'm here to have coffee. I'm here. I don't drink coffee, only tea though, but I'm good for tea. But I'm here to find out what you need. Does that mean that I am, we're sitting in a room and we're making IEP decisions outside of the IEP process? No, we're not having those conversations outside of the IEP process, but we are having conversations that build trust and relationships. And I think people feel really confident now that they're very clear when an advocate meets with me, or a parent meets with me, or whoever calls up and, wants to meet with me, or they really know what to expect, right? They know that they're going to get clear communication. They know it's going to be honest. They know when I say I'm going to do something, that it's going to be followed through with. And I think that takes a while. It didn't happen in 6 months in my position. It took a couple of years even. I mean, a year, probably a little bit more, when people, they saw me at CPAC, they saw me here, they saw me in a hallway, they saw me at drop off or wherever I was, right? That they felt comfortable enough to come to me and talk to me about what it was. So I think that type of communication is critical. Even more so during COVID, we did a lot of written communication because it just wasn't necessarily possible. And I did a lot of question and answers. We'd have parents would have all these questions. And so we'd do a little video, and then we'd put a whole list of question and answer. Then parents would write, like, I still have this question, and I'd add it to the question and answer at the bottom. So asked me this question, here's the answer to that one. And, it was a lot, again, being nimble, like, oh, that question came up yesterday because we didn't know that was a question until that happened. When you go remote, what happens now? And I'm like, okay. So we did a lot of written communication. And we also tried, a lot of times we have a lot of student families that don't, not a lot, but we've growing number of families who don't speak English. And so we learn lots of new ways to do automatic translations and identify who needed what translation or who needed what information. And we're actually, even my CPAC chair and I we're going to go back. Don't tell anyone. We're going to go back to some paper and backpacks tomorrow morning. I know. I don't know. We discussed it. We decided we might try it again. I don't know, but we're going to try something. I used to have when I arrived in my position, I had thousands of pieces of pink paper. And so the CPAC chair is laughing because she's like, Martha, I remember the pink paper. And I'm like, I know, that's all I had when I arrived was thousands of pieces of pink paper. So that's what I did. She's like, well, let's do a few more pink papers this evening. So tomorrow morning, we're putting some pink papers in backpacks too. So it's really around trying all these different things to make sure that anything a parent needs, you're going that direction too.
Wonderful. Martha, I am looking at the clock and realizing we only have like 2 minutes left. So would you like to share something that we didn't ask you about that you would like the families and our community to know about you?
Sure, I guess so. As you may have picked up, I'm a sort of fast talker, enthusiastic person. So I think what I would say is, I really hope my goal is to build a culture of trust and build a culture that allows people to be okay being wrong. And that's a funny thing to say in special education, right? And I think it's critical, it goes along with the nimbleness, right? But it's critical that we all feel really comfortable. I had a conversation with other parents the other day. She came back to me and goes, Martha, I was so wrong. And I was like laughing. And she goes, I'm sorry. I'm like, no, you'd be sorry. Like, why would you be sorry? Right? Like I was hoping you were right too. I was hoping to think, but it's this idea that it's okay, that we're trying to figure this out together, and we're going to be able to do, we're going to get it right and we're going to get it wrong, but we're going to figure that out pretty quickly. So I think for me, that's really critical. It's critical to staff. It's critical for people to know about me. I'm not perfect. I'm not actually 100% of the time. My daughter will tell you that every day. I should say I was never right, but I think I am right some of the time. So I feel like if it's something to know about me, is that's really important to me, and that culture of making sure it's okay to get it wrong, and making sure whether or not how you need to change course.
Wonderful. Martha, thank you so much for joining us tonight. And I'm sure that our parents have enjoyed getting to know you a little bit better. So
thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, and have a good night.
You too. Have a wonderful evening, everyone. Take care.
Hi, everyone. Just a reminder, at the bottom of the list for the listserv that went home giving you the link for today, there is a feedback form. And basically, we're just asking a couple of questions, quick questions, your impressions, and maybe something that you'd like for us to dig a little deeper, or you have more questions to ask. So that feedback would be really helpful for all of us. So right now, I'm going to invite our next candidate in. Hi, Neely. For everybody on YouTube, this is Neely Urquhart, and Neely Urquhart is our second finalist. And Neely, I'd like for you to start out by, sharing some information about yourself that our families and our community would benefit from knowing.
Absolutely. Good evening, everybody. I wish that I could have all of you in front of me, but we have to be flexible within our COVID world. Today, I had the pleasure of meeting with multiple stakeholders within the Millis Public Schools. And I had the opportunity to talk a little bit about how I could contribute to Millis. I'll talk for a couple of minutes about myself, but I definitely want to get to your questions and answer those questions for you. So you can see how I can best fit the needs of your children. So again, I'm Neely Urquhart. I've been in education for 24 years, and 13 of those years were as a teacher. I did start in the private sector and did that for a few years. I worked with students who had physical disabilities as well as students who are on the autism spectrum. My husband and I made the decision to relocate, and at that time, I made the decision to move to the public sector, where I did take a position as an intensive special needs teacher. A job then came up with the Hopedale Public Schools, and I had the opportunity to become a moderate special needs teacher. It was a very important position for me because at the beginning of my career, a lot of what I did was in intensive special needs. But moving into that moderate sector, I had the ability to work with kids with specific learning disabilities, language-based disabilities, dyslexia. And the other great part of it was co-teaching and seeing some really great examples of inclusion and models that could benefit kids with the pairing of a general education and special education teacher. In my 4th year in Hopedale, I was nominated by my superintendent for the Leadership Academy at Worcester State University. At that point, after I completed the program, I was offered the team chair position and made the decision to move on to the Douglas Public Schools, simply because if I really wanted to effectively lead in my first experience, I thought I'd be best served to be in a different district. In moving to Douglas, I've had the opportunity to move up the ladder. I've had 4 different administrative roles, and a couple of those roles were simultaneous. I was the director of student services and a principal at the same time, but I certainly looked for the positives in that and the ability to gain experience in different areas at a young age. From there, I'm currently the assistant superintendent of student support services. The only difference between the position that I am currently interviewing for and that position is the district in Douglas. They did want me to take on some more central office responsibilities, such as different types of grant writing and curriculum work. In Douglas, we don't have anybody that is dedicated solely to curriculum, so that was an important thing for me to do. Moving forward, I'm to the point in my career in Douglas, after being there for 11 years, that I think it's time to take my skill set and my passion of special education to another district. In full disclosure, and I think this is important to say, and I have said it to all the groups that I spoke with today, this isn't a situation that I have to leave Douglas. I'm still under contract, but I feel that, again, it's a situation where I want to spread the knowledge that I have in the area of special education. I want to pair with another set of families and another set of children, another set of staff, to be able to gain something different. And in Douglas, we did some really good work, whether it be through administration, staff, and families, or just the special education staff, special education administration, and our PAC. Our PAC is very special to me. When I initially moved to Douglas into a special education position, things were not in a great direction. I worked very, very hard alongside the special education teachers and the other administrators, including the school committee as well, to make sure that the parents had our trust And that's most important, is for you to know that the best interest of your child is always at the forefront of my mind. I'm honest. You will always, I hope you always know that what I do and the decisions that I make come from my heart. They're always informed decisions, and we may not always agree, and that's okay. But your child will always be in good hands. So at that, I know that you have some questions for me. Joan, I'm going to move to you.
Thank you, Neely. Neely, so how do you see the role of parents and guardians in the IEP process?
It's very important. It's very important. And I think what's very important is that parents understand that they are a part of that process. And it's very important that districts make sure that parents know that that is their right. Sometimes I think that parents come to IEP meetings and two things occur that I always try to make sure don't occur. One, special education staff, whether it be administrators or teachers, ABAs, paras, we speak a different language. And something that's very important is to make sure that when we are in an IEP meeting, parents understand the language we are speaking, and parents really know what we're talking about and understand that the decisions that are being made and what in fact is going into the IEP. So that's something that's very important. The other piece is making sure that the parents have a voice. I always remind parents at the beginning of the meeting, when I say things like, this is a team decision, the parents are a part of it. I will tell you that, within my 11 years in Douglas, we have created a lot of programs, and the parents have been a part of the creation of those programs. You have a voice, you know what your children need. It's important that the administration is listening to that.
Great, thank you. Not all graduates of Millis Public Schools go on to college, and that is often true also of special needs students. Special education graduates, if they're not going on to college, they may be in need of some additional job skills. Can you talk a little bit about how you would address that?
Absolutely. So what I will tell you is in Douglas, I did create an 18 to 22 program. It's something that we did not have when I first arrived. And within the first couple of years of me being there, we did not have students that had a need for that for a variety of reasons. What I was starting to notice was that there was a cohort of students that was moving up, and they did require a transitional program. So what I did was, first of all, I went around to surrounding districts, and I sought out districts that had strong transitional programs. One particular district that I'll speak to is Nipmuc. They had a very strong transitional program, and I really tried to mimic some of the work that they were doing. What was very important was not just to create a new program, but to make sure that there was a high level of understanding for the families and the kids around vocational education, adaptive living skills, and making sure that kids were being set up in different job sites, whether it be, and I'll just give examples of some of the venues that I worked with, whether it be particular car washes, grocery stores. We had one kiddo that actually worked at a law firm, did some filing and like that, Salvation Army, senior centers, and basically finding the levels of interest that the kids had and pair that with their skill set. So when the students did turn 22, they would have skills behind them, and then they could move forward to be more independent once they age out.
Thank you. And one of the things we have at different times, a lot of families moving in. Sometimes they have young children, sometimes they have middle school children or high school students, and that creates situations for the schools where we might have to really look at our programs and figure out where we need some more programs and or attention to what's being offered. So if a family right now, if our needs are in the preschool area, can you talk a little bit about how you would address that, whether it's preschool, middle school, or high school, the flexibility that's needed for that?
Absolutely. your programs are extremely important. It's when you're thinking about special education programs, the first thing that you have to do is you have to think about the population of children that fit into it. You have to make sure that you have an appropriate program that meets the educational needs of the student, the social emotional needs of the student, the behavioral needs of the student. But something else that's extremely important are the peers within there. If kids don't have peers within their program, it's not a complete program. I have developed a multitude of programs in Douglas. I'll tell you a little bit. I'm not going to get too much into it because I want to be able to answer your questions, but I've created a language-based program at 2 of the schools. I've created a social emotional program, which is across the district. I created a transition program, again, 18 to 22. As far as the pre-K piece, we do have an integrated program. And what I've done and worked towards over the last few years is really pairing with early intervention and making sure that the district has a really solid understanding of the students. Because these little kiddos, they're coming in, they've had therapies and services through early intervention. We need to make sure that we have a handle on what the students need. And that just doesn't come through the formal observation that the district does. That also comes through, a series of different assessments, having the kids come in, seeing how the kids would fit into our programs. The way I create programs, again, is student population, but data collection. What is the need? What do the students need? How can we help the students? The data doesn't lie. The data does not lie. So that definitely allows us to create informed decisions. But I have a multitude of experience with creating programs.
Thank you. Can you talk a little bit about equal and equitable?
Absolutely. Equal and equitable at this point, this day and age, nationwide, statewide, district-wide, this is where we are. And the first thing that I need to say about it is that we need to be brave. We need to be brave enough to do the things that are right for everybody. Something that I have passionately fought for in my career, and I won't just say as an administrator, as a teacher, is to make sure that students are getting inclusive opportunities. That's not just in the classroom. That's through different activities such as drama club, such as gaming club, such as sports. I'm just going to give you a quick example. I work with a student. The student is an amazing athlete. And there's this idea, or was this idea, that this student should be a part of our unified sports program that we started. And that would all be well and good, and having the role as an intensive special needs student. But in my mind, if that child has staffing with him and is able to access our typical sports program, my question to everybody is, why can't he do that? And the student is actually doing it and having great success, as much success as everybody can have right now during COVID athletic seasons. But my point in saying that is there can be no limits. And we have to meet kids at their least restrictive environment. And that's going to look different for everybody, but we have to give kids the opportunity to be everything that they can be.
Thank you, Neely. Neely, can you talk a little bit about supports and systems for trauma and mental health?
Yes, this is something I'm extremely passionate about. So within my role, and I do know within the role of the Millis Public Schools, the position of the Director of Student Support is not just special education. It's also student support. So I currently work with our school adjustment counselors and I work with our school psychologists. Again, not just in the area of special education, but dealing with students who have mental health related disabilities, social emotional issues, and such. It's to the point now with COVID and some of the trauma that's come with that for different kids and the transitional issues that have come. We're meeting 2 times a month to make sure that the systems that we have in place are appropriate. When we looked at social emotional weaknesses 6-7 years ago, we were looking at things like the social thinking program. We were looking more towards the autism spectrum. Now this is branched out globally. So things that you can use are things like signs of suicide, things, different types of programs on a daily basis that can measure where students' social emotional wellness are, provide you with data, and allow the school adjustment counselors and psychologists to react if they need to. What's also extremely important is making sure if parents are amenable to it, that we have release forms signed, and we have the ability as a school district to communicate with outside providers. Again, if parents are amenable to it, this is not something I'm pushing. But what happens is if a student has an outside provider assisting them with some sort of social emotional issue or mental health disability, that allows us to create a bridge as a school district between what's happening at home, what's happening with the outside provider, and what's happening with the school district. And it creates a really nice trifecta of support for the student.
Thank you.
No problem.
You talked a little bit about in your introduction about, Douglas being a small town, Millis obviously a small town too, but there are other small towns that have openings right now for this position. Why Millis?
I'm going to give you an unsophisticated answer. It feels right. Your district, first of all, it's a beautiful town. Your district, in my research of it, in many ways matches my skill set. Millis in many ways reminds me of Douglas. The numbers are very comparable. The amount of students that you have in 504 plans are comparable. The amount of students that you have on IEPs are comparable. Something that is very telling to me is you have not gone to hearing in a number of years. There's 2 reasons that a district doesn't go to hearing. 1, you have good programs and you're in sync. 2, there's a level of trust and a bond with the families. And without sounding overconfident, those are the things I do best. The bonding with the families, the working together with the staff and the families to make sure that we're creating good plans for kids. It is exactly what I stand for. I had spoken a little bit today about the fact that we had an audit in Douglas, and we are now on our 2nd audit with no findings for special education or English learners. Yes, this is something that I'm extremely proud of, and it wasn't just me. It was a combination of our PAC. It was a combination of our teachers, of our administrators, of everybody. But what I'm going to say about that is that level of compliance and that expectation for our district is something that should be, because that's what creates the best scenario for kids. And I think when I look at Millis, you have that. You have that little sparkle, and I said it today to many people. It's important not only for me to be a good fit for you, but you to be a good fit for me. And in all of the conversations I have absolutely no doubt that we would be a great match for each other.
Neil, you talked a little bit about transitions in the 18 to 22 programs, but can you talk a little bit about transitions within our schools, but also with moving from school to school?
Absolutely. So something that is extremely important, and I make sure happens every year, actually around this time of year, is I speak to all the special education liaisons that are in those transitional grades. So I'm going to give you my current grades just so you can get a feel. So in other words, you're pre-K to K. For us, it's 1 to 2 because it moves to another grade, 5 to 6, and then 8 to 9. Those are transitional times for kids. what we make sure of is that we always hold transition meetings. And we try to have an entire team. And if parents request that, we certainly do. But it's important for your kids that have transitional issues, regardless of their disability. Some you can have a student with a learning disability and they have transitional weaknesses. So it's important that the team takes some time. It's important that we have tours for kids. It's important that teacher to teacher, grade to grade, that people are communicating, and that we're not just doing, vertical teaming, but we're also doing horizontal teaming. This is hugely important, and something that I do in my spare time that I do look into is curriculum, and how the curriculum changes from grade to grade. And kids that have disabilities can sometimes have issues with the gaps, the natural gaps that come within our curriculums within the public school setting. So, it's very important for somebody within my position to know about those things, because that plays into IEP development, modification, and accommodations.
And can you talk a little bit about outreach or communication with families?
Absolutely. It's constant. To the point it might get annoying, but I will tell you, I'll give you an example of COVID. I think it's the most recent thing. You may be able to go on the Douglas website just to see some of the correspondence that I did have. But what I would do is I'd make sure that I got to the parents every week. And what I would do is I would update them. I would make sure that they were aware of exactly what we were doing within guidelines, curriculum, IEP meetings, things like transition, protocols, procedures, all of it. Other thing that I do now, I used to do it face-to-face. Now sometimes I'll do it through Zoom. I hold community forums for parents. It might be something simple, like example, we have Special Olympics coming up. It's an annual celebration that we have each year. And I just put out the permission form to parents. So what I'll do next week is I'll hold a quick community forum, simply because the parents are going to be wondering, okay, we've done this for 13 consecutive years, but what's that going to look like in COVID? I want parents to be informed. It's very, very, very important for trust. And again, your children are the most sacred thing in your life. And you're trusting your children in our hands. So it's important to me that we're communicating, and you know where I am and I know where you are.
And Neely, we're just about wrapping up with the questions that we have. So would you like to take a couple minutes, and maybe there was something you'd like to share with us that we didn't ask you about?
Sure. What I think is really important for everybody to know, and I'll leave you with this, is, I talked about it with the staff and with the administration today. There's two things. When I stopped teaching, there were two things that I swore to myself that I would always maintain. One was never forgetting what it was to be a teacher, and two is never forgetting what it is to be a parent. And every decision that I make, and I promise you this, I always think of my son, always. And I always think, would that be right for him? Am I doing the right thing? Because if you don't have a level of conscience within my position, you're not always going to make the right decision. I think it's also important for you to know that I do love somebody very much that has an intensive disability. And I always think of that as well. So again, I make responsible decisions. I make informed decisions. We'll try to agree as much as we can. And I hope it's more than we don't, but again, we'll pair and we'll have a partnership, and I'll be present at every PAC meeting, and we'll do it together.
Thank you so much, Neely, for joining us today in school, and also for being with us tonight.
Thanks so much, Joan.
Thank you,
everybody. Good night.
Good night. Well, again, thank you, everybody, for listening, hanging with us to hear more about Neely. And just a reminder, in that letter, there is a link on the bottom with Neely's name attached to it. And if you would be willing to give us some feedback, we'd appreciate that. And I'm actually just going to put myself on mute for just a moment Our third candidate has not signed in yet, so I'm just going to make a quick phone call and make sure that she is available and not struggling to get into the Zoom call. So if you'll excuse me for just a minute, I will be right back. Thank you, folks, for being patient. Anne is now in our waiting room, so we are ready to start again. So here we go. I'm going to admit our third candidate into our Zoom call. Hi, Anne. Nice to see you again.
Hi, Joan. Nice to see you.
And we have community members as parents and guardians, as well as just some Millis people waiting to hear all about you. So with that, I'm going to start by asking you to share a little information about yourself.
Right.
And then after a couple of minutes, I have some questions that have been submitted by our community. And so I'm going to be able to ask you those questions.
Sounds great.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. So you can start by telling us a little bit about yourself.
Oh, okay, great. I expected to see other faces.
Oh,
It's just
sorry.
you, Joan?
Maybe we should have explained that. I apologize.
No,
It's just you and me and Dave Bush on Zoom. Everyone else is watching on YouTube.
great. I'm so used to a crowded screen of a Brady Bunch looking, situation. Great. Well, thank you, Joan. Hello, and thank you, CPAC parents and Millis community members and the rest who might be joining this meeting, for inviting me to meet with you tonight. My name is Anne Zernicke, and I live just down the road from Millis in Natick with my husband and our new puppy. I'm the mother of two extraordinary young adults, one of whom had an IEP from second grade throughout his career in the Natick Public Schools. And when my children were in the schools, I was a proud member of CPAC. I was a participant in school councils at some of their schools. And I was also encouraged to run for school committee and elected to 2 terms, which was absolutely fascinating. So my commitment to make sure that families' voices are heard is real. In terms of my qualifications, Joan, I appreciate a chance to share a bit more about my background, which I believe and have been told by others makes me ideally suited to serve children and families as an administrator of student services. And as I hope you'll conclude, the director of student support services in Millis. The bio that I understand was shared with you covers about the last 15 years of my service in public schools. That includes as a special education teacher in Newton for many years, a building administrator up in Wakefield, and my current position, Assistant Director of Student Services, district-wide pre-K to 12 in Weston. What I'd like to add and highlight is that my career has been devoted to special education from the start, and it includes many additional administrative positions in a variety of settings that I'd like to share quickly. I began as a special ed teacher in a self-contained class for children with significant behavioral difficulties. And I learned, it became abundantly clear that while I was able to manage their behavior, I had no idea about how to teach them how to read. And so I knew I had to return to school to become better educated in how reading develops and what to do about it for those who struggle. So fortunately, I was accepted to the Harvard School of Education into the reading program, and I completed a master's degree in reading, language, and learning disabilities, and was really fortunate that I was able to also complete an internship at Boston Children's Hospital. The multidisciplinary teamwork and the diagnostic assessment procedures that I learned were phenomenal, and it just made my heart sing. So I became passionate about that whole clinical piece. Following grad school, I worked in the child psychiatric unit as a teacher at Tufts New England Medical Center, and then spent a decade at Franciscan Children's Hospital as its director of the multidisciplinary evaluation program and liaison to area school districts who were referring children for comprehensive multidisciplinary evals, as well as the director of the reading department. My young family then moved to New Jersey, and I was fortunate to be approached and recruited to become the associate director for curriculum and instruction at the New Grange School, which is a school for children and high school students with dyslexia. And we were really proud that our collaborative efforts to revamp the entire intervention model assessment program, which were shared with public schools, was recognized by the state of New Jersey. So that was a wonderful project. We then happily returned to Massachusetts, and I worked as a consultant in the MGH Hansen Literacy Hill program, which I understand is presently consulting with Millis, which is wonderful. And I also became regional director through the fascinating Reading First program through Department of Education. So the work there was fascinating. I was fortunate to receive training, as were my colleagues, in best practices, the science of reading, evidence-based assessment, and that kind of thing, by experts throughout the country. And then we were trained as trainers and went to districts to train administrators, teachers, coaches in urban and suburban districts throughout Massachusetts. So it was really a fascinating experience. So given these experiences, what I believe makes me uniquely qualified for the director position here in Millis at this time is, in addition to extensive knowledge that I've acquired of special ed laws, regulations, and processes, I have extensive clinical experiences and knowledge of research-based curricula, specialized interventions and assessments, including technology that enhances student learning and social emotional learning techniques and best practices. I've also got a track record of successfully leading strategic initiatives that require goal setting, collaborative teamwork, and the use of data to inform instruction. And all this for the purpose of building robust school-wide, district-wide tier models of supports to meet the needs of all of our students. I greatly enjoy and am skilled at collaboration and at providing ongoing supervision and training for teachers, paraprofessionals in highly specialized interventions, whether it be for academics or behavior. I have an exemplary record of training teachers with learning differences and with dyslexia, autism, or behavioral for teaching children with dyslexia, autism, or behavioral challenges. And what I really wanted to highlight too was that my experience as a parent of a child who received special education services certainly informs my work every day and has made me committed to ensuring ongoing communications with families is a priority in our daily work, and that the processes and procedures are explained clearly to families. All questions are answered, and that families understand and know that they are valued and integral members of any team. So reasons that I chose to apply for this position: my background, expertise, and values, I am convinced align closely with what I've learned about the Millis community. Millis enjoys a strong reputation, I can tell you as a neighbor, as I said, down the road here in Natick, as a caring, innovative school district. A school district like Natick, who is proud of its schools and its community. Its size, like Weston, I believe lends itself to ongoing communication with all stakeholders inside the school community and outside, and establishing and sustaining relationships, as well as knowing the name of all students and families. Through my work in Natick and Weston, I've established networks and relationships with many agencies over the last 5 to 10 years. And I believe that knowledge and those relationships would continue to be an asset. And let's see, finally, staff and faculty are described as professional, positive, caring, and always child-centered. And I'm told by neighbors and colleagues that Millis staff and faculty are thought of as caring, involved, supportive, and child-centered as well. So the chance to join and to serve the Millis School Committee and their children and its children and families would be a privilege. I really appreciate your consideration of my candidacy, and I would be happy to answer any questions that you may have, Joan.
Well, thank you very much. So the questions come from our parents and community members. And so the first question is, how do you see the role of parents and guardians in the IEP process?
Well, like I alluded to, primarily informed by my own experience as a parent in the IEP process. And I came to the table, given my professional background, as someone with some knowledge of how this process went. So I knew the questions to ask, and maybe I had a little more confidence in pushing and asking more questions. That has made me really have empathy for and be devoted to the fact that teams in schools need to be really mindful of not using jargon, making things as clear and explicit. We need to check ourselves and be careful that what we think we've explained as next steps may not have been cleared. And perhaps most importantly, as I said earlier, that we make sure families at the very beginning of the process, whether it's preschool or high school, feel they've been heard, that we've communicated that we're welcoming them to ask any questions they may have, and that we have and will communicate with them as clearly as possible in writing and otherwise. in terms of any questions, documents, evaluation, consent forms, whatever it may be. Most of all, we need to make sure they know that they are valued and integral members of the team, and that no decisions will be made without their permission and consent.
And can you talk a little bit, often, not all of our graduates go on to college, and that is also true of special education graduates, that they don't plan on going to college. Can you talk a little bit about those who might be in needs of job skills and how you would handle that?
Yes. So this has been a relatively new area to me, and I am fascinated to learn of all the resources that do exist and to learn more about, frankly, the processes for transition planning at age 14 and all of that. Last year in Weston, the position of out of district coordinator was done away with. And so I took on many of the cases of our students that are placed out of district, which was my opening to learn much more about the schools that some of our high school age students are in, who will not pursue college, who will not pursue, and the wonderful post-grad experiences. So there's a plethora of programs that exist in out-of-district placements for students that are placed there. But we've also learned through DSS and the 6 to 88 referral process and all the other pieces that are in place for us to learn more. And that is part of transition planning when a student turns 14, that a great deal exists within even the Metro West community. For example, a student whose goal it is to live independently, what comes to mind is we arranged an appointment with Charles River Services, and wonderful reps came to the meeting and spoke with the family in terms of the options that were available and set out the whole plan for how apartments would be looked at and they could visit and that sort of thing. So really concrete steps that would be taken. So yeah, does that answer the question, Joan, in terms of, a multitude of services exist, and DESE certainly gives us guidelines and timelines that we need to adhere to for transition. There's a person too, I just want to add, Amanda Green is this phenomenal resource at DESE, who seems to be the expert in all things related to transitions. And she's wonderful about just allowing us to pick up the phone and ask a question in terms of which agency we should be contacting, or specific questions about a particular student. She makes the point that the transition planning form itself, which I believe is in most IEP programs, is actually meant to capture the student's voice and goals, which makes it critically important for teams to be mindful of and plan for the student to be at those meetings and work to be done in terms of transition, assessment, surveys, that kind of thing. So yeah, that's a really exciting piece. Not only the transition from early intervention into preschool, but postgraduate programs. And there's a lot available. We're very fortunate in this area.
Yeah, and you kind of answered a couple of the parts of another question, but I'm going to see if I can reword it a little bit.
Sure.
In addition to the transitions from age 3, early intervention, into the public schools, and for the 18-year-olds going out of the public school, can you talk a little bit about transitions within the schools, like maybe going from building 1 to building 2, or different grade levels?
Sure. So I imagine this is something that's been given a lot of thought as well in Millis. In Weston, we've worked hard on what are obvious transitions to help support families and the teams themselves. So for example, there's a lot in place, And I have been fascinated by and thoroughly enjoyed the work that Riverside Early Intervention does as preschoolers, as we welcome preschoolers into the process, evaluate them and determine eligibility as to whether we'll be welcoming them into our integrated preschool program or providing services when they turn 3. But the next, what became critically clear to us is, well, the integrated preschool program, once students are there, for the most part, they really thrive. But there's a lot of concern from both preschool teachers and parents sometimes for some of them going to kindergarten. So we identified that, as I imagine you and Millis have as well, as another point that we need to sort of work backwards and be really thoughtful about what needs to be in place for individual students to set them up for success, and families as well. And that can mean services, that can mean ESY work to get ready to be a rising kindergarten and what they need academically, social, emotionally, behaviorally, just to really make sure plans are in place. Because often system and structures, I would guess in Millis as well, I haven't had a chance to observe or check in yet. That'll be Monday. But certainly in Weston, change pretty dramatically from preschool to kindergarten. And then we're very intentional in terms of in our school system, it's 3rd graders go to a different school for 4th grade. So that's another critical point, that the special ed teams meet together and we have a whole kind of timeline for when specifics are shared about individual students. And it starts about mid-year before the transition in terms, and families are invited in for their thoughts, of course, as well. And they're okay. And IEPs are amended if appropriate or if need be. And then, so our upper elementary is only 4th and 5th. So another critical transition point is 5th to 6th, which happens in a similar way. And it just sort of follows from there. One thing that we've also included that we realized was a missing piece that we weren't paying enough attention to, the families of our students, our English language learner families. We put in extra information nights with our ELE teachers at every point along through high school and middle school, so that they just have a space and a particular time that they can ask questions. It usually takes place just before or just after the larger, for the entire community, information night. So that's another piece that's added just to make sure we're reaching families that may just need a little bit more support or another chance to ask particular questions.
Wonderful. Can you talk a little bit about equal and equitable?
Yes. So as we often teach children at a very young age, it's everybody may not get equal. It's all about equity. It's what each individual person needs. So there's that great graphic of the children looking over the fence, and each one has a different box, because if it was equal, they'd all get the same size box, and 2 would still not be able to see over the fence, so to speak, as the graphic goes. But to make it equitable, we give them just what they need. We, in fact, tailor those boxes to meet each individual's needs so that the playing field, so to speak, is more level. And so that is critically important, particularly now, given all that's going on in our world. And, including cultural responsiveness, and are we really welcoming? Are we sure? Are we checking our biases and sure that we are treating everyone that comes into our community, families and students, with respect, and being as culturally responsive as we can in terms of learning about their backgrounds and how we might better support them. So yeah, so equity is something that needs to be first and foremost in our minds. And I think as special educators, it's something that comes naturally. It's kind of the nature of our work, hopefully. So yeah, really important value to think about on a daily basis.
Can you talk a little bit about the ability to plan for that influx of students at different grade levels? Like right now, the community has some building of homes. We have some young families coming in with young children, and there might be an impact on preschool, or we might have extra, a particularly large group of students who move into our high school. And talk a little bit about how you would address those needs.
So when they're just in general, Joan, or when it's specifically students coming to us with IEP services?
Correct.
Yes,
Yes.
students coming
Yes.
to us with IEP services.
Yes, sorry about that.
No. So, well, kind of regardless. Again, in Weston, the way we practice this is kind of big picture. We check in about, because I'll tell you, in the last year, we have noticed dips and dives in enrollment almost month by month, just for different reasons. So we've had to be able to respond a little bit. So we stay kind of on top of if one school or one team has many more initial evaluations, or many more students, families who have moved in, and suddenly there's a number of IEPs with many services that need to be honored. So one thing we do with the team chairs is meet on a weekly basis so that we know about that and can be as proactive as possible. Hopefully we've received the documents like the IEPs before the families actually arrive, so we can do some planning. And it's been great because we've been pretty successful at shifting things a little bit and working together, and folks have been great about helping each other out. It comes, whether it's assessment or providing services. And I think it goes a long way for us to kind of take a collaborative approach to that, and kind of, full transparency of what's going on. So that's been the solution for us. Actually, if we knew there was going to be a real surge or bubble, I mean, preschool's kind of different. I'll be curious to hear about that, because we have a long waiting list, so we can kind of control, but it is true that at certain points in the year, we get more referrals of students that join us from early intervention. And we've been able to switch students sometimes into other rooms, or the 2 preschool classrooms that we have in each of the lower elementary buildings actually work so closely that they have been able to kind of make adjustments to make sure the ratios stay, manageable and what's best for students. So
wonderful. So Anne, our last question for tonight really is about communication. As the Director of Student Support, can you talk a little bit about how communication and outreach to families might happen?
So this was another big takeaway, if we hadn't learned it already in the past year during this whole COVID thing, that ongoing frequent communication was absolutely required. So communication, we're proud of keeping up to date. Important notes from DESE, that kind of thing, are posted. Important communications from us in terms of shifts in scheduling, or how we were welcoming students in, or planning for ESY, are posted on the website. We also, again, have team chairs push out to families these same communications. And in terms of our communications with individual families, in Weston, the director and I and our administrative assistant assistants have, kind of an open door policy in terms of any questions, we are happy to answer, or we'll direct them to the appropriate person. But I think ongoing communication is critical. I think updates about what DESE is telling us are changing. For example, the guidelines for dyslexia that we've been waiting for about a year have just dropped today. They're just posted. And so, that'll be important for us to summarize and post. And I think to add and share with families, as I'm sure in the cases with Millis, we have a lot in place already. So much of the guidelines validate what we've been doing and is in place. And what's our plan for action steps for, that these guidelines suggest. So let's see what else. And in terms of the IEP process itself, as I mentioned, critically important. We, I think, probably in Weston, communicate with parents by phone prior to the IEP process, or as soon as there's a request for eval, probably more frequently than other folks do, I would imagine, to answer any questions and to just, make sure we've established or we're reestablishing open communication lines and a strong relationship as we embark on the journey. So critically important.
Mhm. So Anne, that concludes all of our questions. We have a couple more, just a couple minutes. Would you like to share something else that maybe we didn't ask you about? And it's okay if you don't. It's
Yeah,
pressure.
no, I think we've covered a lot of topics. I would have said communication, collaboration, absolutely critical. Families need to feel valued and heard and are integral parts of the process. And as a special education leader, and teachers and related service providers need to make sure families feel that way. So I think we covered that, Joan.
Awesome.
So thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Anne, for joining us tonight. We appreciate your time, and we'll see you on Monday.
Okay, great.
Yes.
See you then.
Alrighty.
Thanks again.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Well, everyone, I'd like to thank you all for being here tonight. It certainly has been nice to find out some more information about each of our candidates. I would just remind you again that there is a link for you to give feedback about Anne, and it's on the bottom of that tab, bottom tab of the document that we sent home with the listserv. And any time or any feedback you'd like to give, please feel free to use that. And if there's something else that you would like to share, my email is jlynn, Lynn, at Millis Public Schools. Millis Schools, I apologize, I don't know my email address, millisschools.org. And so please feel free to drop anything in there if you feel that there's something else that you'd like to share. And with that, I'd like to say good night and hope you all have a great evening. Thanks so much.